Welcome back to our course on HTML5 for beginners, and in this class we'll be talking about comments, right? So let's understand what comments are. So in HTML or other programming languages, you would always find comments. Comments are used in our HTML files for two important purposes. All right, so you can use it for documentation of your code or for hiding contents. So now when it comes to documentation of your code, basically there is always this joke that you always see online. There is probably programmers joke will tell you, when I wrote this code, it was only I and God that knew what I did. Now after 6 months, it's only God that knows what I did. All right, so in order to avoid such scenarios in your code, it's always good to document it so that when you come back to them in 4 or 5 years time, you can easily figure and find out what you were actually doing in the past. All right, so while writing out your code today, you might actually think that, oh, I will always get what I've done. But now when you must have written codes that runs into hundreds of thousands of lines and you leave them for, let's say, 2 months, when you come back, you won't even believe that you were the one that wrote the code. Okay, so that's why we need to document our code to make it easier for us and for other programmers to understand what we were doing or what we try to do. And mind you, any commented content on the HTML file and probably every other programming language you could think of are not displayed either on the terminal or on your browser. All right, so whatever we comment out on our HTML file will not be displayed on our browser. Okay, so now for hiding contents, sometimes you would want to test out a code, or you will be testing out a code and you realize that there are errors, right? And you don't really know where the problem is coming from. And this is always the case when there are excessive or less closing tags that's as required. All right, so maybe you have 8 opening tags and you have 6 closing tags. So sometimes your browser might now combine things that shouldn't be combined together, especially when you're working and maybe you have the section and the footer. So your browser might be missing up things due to the fact that you forgot to close some tags. Okay, so maybe along the line you want to check out some part of your code and debug and actually see where the problem is coming from. So that's when you might want to hide contents on your file. All right, so another time you might want to hide content is let's say you actually worked on something and you think maybe you don't need such contents now, but you might somehow be in need of it in the future, or your client might somehow be in need of it in the future. So you can use comments to hide it out. However, it is not always a wise thing to do because it will always confuse another programmer who would want to view your code. So that's why that's where JIT comes in. All right, so when we get into JIT, you will understand how it will help us in avoiding such kind of scenarios. But for now, we'll stick to using comments to do such things. All right, so now we'll be moving into our text editor, and we'll set up our live server and our web browser. Remember the web browser we are using, our Firefox for the developers edition, right? That's what we'll be using. So we'll set them up to view whatever we are doing on our text editor on the browser. All right, so you can pause the video and open up your text editor and your browser. Remember, it is the developers edition. So I have my text editor open up here. Then the next thing I will do is to minimize my window and add up so now I have my text editor on one side and I have my browser on the other side. You can see how I have stacked the both together. All right, okay, so the next thing I would want to do is to create a file inside of this our HTML5 folder right here. All right, remember how we talked about our text editor serving the same purpose of what Microsoft Word would serve in the word processing environment or word processing world. All right. So in the programming world, our text editor is where we write our codes. Okay. So I'll get on to open this. Okay. So I'll call this index.html. All right. So now there is a reason why I chose the name index.html. When you start building your websites, all right, always make sure that your landing page starts with the name index, because that's what your server or your host will actually route in for. That's the first file it will look out for, right? So once it sees it, when you type your web address, for instance, when we type facebook.com, something of this nature now. So it looks out for the first file that bears the index. All right. So you see that there is no / here to indicate maybe whether this is an index file or not. But then whenever you type the Facebook name, it looks for that first file, probably the index file for Facebook or whichever file they've chosen. All right. So, but it's always the index file. Okay. So always make sure the name of your file is index.html so that when the address of your site is typed in, it is the first file or the first page that is open. Now, another thing you should notice is the .html. Right? If you have worked with Microsoft Word, you notice that when we save a file, we just write the name of the file and save. We don't add the extension. So the Microsoft Word helps us to add the extension unless we want to state explicitly the extension we want to use. All right. But then when you're working on the web and you're creating some files, it's always very, very important and always very, very advisable. Not even just advisable, it is compulsory that you should indicate the extension of the file you are working with. Now, in our case, we are working with HTML, so we need to indicate that this file is an HTML file by including the .html. All right. So when we start working with CSS, we'll have something like the .css. All right. So always have that at the back of your mind. So what this extension does is to help our text editor to recognize the language we are writing. So when it does that, it will readjust and try to give us the right suggestions and the right formatting that we need. Okay, so I guess by now you must have installed the extensions we talk about, the bracket pair colorizer, our live server, most importantly our live server, then the prettier. All right, so if you already have that installed, then you are good to go. If you haven't, I bet you should visit our class on VS Code. All right, go back to the video on VS Code and see what we did over there, then you can join us here. So if you already have your live server installed, the extension installed, you should see something of this nature down here. All right, so you click on it. Now it is starting up. So you see what it says. It says server is started at port 5500. So now how do we actually get to use that on our browser? So what you should do is always note the port which this is starting on your system. So it might be different on your own system. All right. So if this doesn't display for you, just look down here. You would always see ports whatever number yours opened on your system. All right. So what I can do now is I move back to my browser, then I type in, watch very well what I'm doing. I'll type in localhost. All right, then I'll now say colon 5500, then I'll hit enter. All right, so now this port is now live. So I am now live on my browser, right? But then you can see the warning here. It says live reload is not possible without body or head tag. So remember what I told you in our last class about the head tag. See that for some things to work, it is needed, and either the head tag or the body tag is needed for some things to work in this case. All right, so I'll close up these boxes now so that we start off. So now from our last class, we made mention of the doc type, and we said that it should be the first thing we type out in our document. All right. So that's exactly what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to type in doc type. All right. You see what happened there? Let me go back a bit. So the moment I did this, it gave me an option. So that's the usefulness of HTML. All right. Sorry, the usefulness of VS Code. It gives you that IntelliSense ability that is able to recognize what you are trying to do. So, and that's the more reason why you should have an extension indicated on your file here. So it is because of this extension, this VS Code is able to know that we are working on a HTML file, right? So now since the extension is .html, it sets it by default, although you can still change it if you want from here. That's by clicking on this. But then since the extension is .html, it knows that by default. So when I now typed in this closing angle bracket over here, it's already giving me an option of different tags. But then seeing that I haven't actually written anything on this file, it thought it wise to give me the doc type first, because that should be the first thing on my web file, on my HTML file. So it says a preamble for an HTML document. All right. So always have that in mind. So I'm going to use the suggestion. So I won't type it out because as you already know, I'm lazy in this aspect. So now you see we have the doc type and our HTML tag indicated at the same time. Now in the previous versions of HTML, this is not what you get. You have some long lines of I wouldn't call that gibberish though, but I'm tempted to call it gibberish. Long lines of text that should help tell the browser what HTML version you're working on. But then from HTML5, it was shortened to what we have over here. So now the next thing that we should include is our HTML tag. All right. So I wouldn't be using the doc type in this case now. Oh, what did I just do? IntelliSense or suggestion this time. I'll just type it out. So I have HTML. So once I type out the opening tag, it gives me the closing tag as well for elements that has, or tags that has closing tags. All right, elements that have closing tags, it gives me the closing tags as well. All right, so that's what it did here for me. Okay, so the next thing that follows up is the header. So now I will show you some things or some usefulness of this VS Code. One of the reasons why we are using VS Codes, I've shown you the IntelliSense ability in one aspect. I'm also going to show it to you in another aspect. So we want to do this. We want to type out the head. So this is also a part of what you should have in your HTML code. All right. So the head. All right. So but then I would maybe prefer to, instead of going through the rigor of typing this less than symbol, typing the whole text, I could just type head, right? Then I hit the enter key. So since I have a suggestion here already, I just hit the enter key and it will complete it for me. All right. So that's part of the usefulness of the IntelliSense. All right. So we are talking about comments. So I had to write this out to actually get through to what we are talking about. So I'll get to the body of our document. Then I want to type out something. I want to say this is an example. Okay, this is not an example of a comment, right? So let's wait for that. Okay, so I have to refresh because it won't reload without these things at the first instant. So from now henceforth, it should be able to reload on its own. All right, so for instance, if I say comments, you see, I already have it here without reloading it. All right, so now this is not an example of a comment. Quick question, why is it not an example of a comment? So you can pause the video and answer it yourself and see if you will get the answer, because I will be telling you the answer just now. Okay, so the reason why it's not a comment is because as you can see, it's being displayed on our browser. Comments are not displayed on the browser. The browser ignores them. All right, so I wouldn't want this video to be longer than it already is, so we'll rush into to talk about how we can write out comments on our HTML file. So to comment on your HTML file for either documentation purpose or for hiding elements, you would use first of all the less than or the opening angle bracket, then a exclamation mark followed by two hyphens. All right, so you see when I do that, it when I did that, it completed the whole stuff for me, right? So this is the structure of your comments, all right? The structure of a HTML comment. So inside here, I will not say this is an example of a comment, all right? So you see that whatever I've written here, the page has reloaded. I'll still reload it for you to see, but it won't be displayed on the browser. If I decide to, if I want to have multiple lines, all right, I can still just bring it down here and I write every other thing. This text will not be displayed to the browser. Now, if you notice, this only refresh when I stop typing, right? Because we saved, we set our autosave to save our file after delay. So, and our live server listens to when the file is saved. So whenever the file is saved, it reloads and gives you the output over here. All right. So that is a comment for you in HTML. So we can comment pretty anything on HTML. We can comment elements. We can comment tags, different things in HTML. All right, and they won't be displayed on the browser. So this is the end of the class for today, and I hope to see you in the next class. Do have a nice day. Bye.